Hi, my name is Taylor Garcia, and today we are going to be talking about becoming familiar with the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which is also known as FERPA. So to start, we're going to talk a little bit about what FERPA is. FERPA is a federal law that protects the privacy of student education records that are maintained or collected by an educational agency. And it applies to all educational agencies that receive any sort of federal funding for programs that are offered by an educational institution. So FERPA provides for families the right of parents and any adult-age students to inspect and receive a copy of any sort of student record. It provides the right to deny access to others, specifically outside of the school system, for those people to gain access to any sort of record that a school might have. It provides a process to correct any errors that could be made to a student record. It provides the right for parents or adult-age students to opt out of any form of military recruitment, which typically happens at the secondary level. It provides the right to opt out of the disclosure of any sort of directory information that could be provided to families that are members of a school. And finally, it provides a whole complaint process that is handled by the Family Compliance Office, which is a part of the U.S. Department of Education. So parent rights that are included in FERPA are the prevention of disclosing any personal identifiable information from education records without consent from a parent or an adult-age child. It also provides the right to access, review, and inspect any sort of student education records when needed. And finally, it provides parents the right to request any correction of the educational records. So now that we know what FERPA is, let's talk about what FERPA is not, because it does not provide individuals the right to sue a school. The only sanction that can be given to schools comes from the U.S. Department of Education if there has been a violation of FERPA. FERPA also does not provide the opportunity for students and parents to opt out of disclosure of any sort of information. So parents and adult-age children have to do that themselves. It's not provided by schools or any educational system. And finally, FERPA does not provide any requirements for safeguarding education records. So we do know that these have to be safeguarded, but it does not dictate how the information is safeguarded. Moving in now, if there are any of those violations and complaints, this is how those things would be handled. So in 2002, the U.S. Supreme Court actually decided that individuals do not have the right to sue under FERPA. So in other words, there is no sort of action that parents or adult-age children can make. The only thing they can do is file a complaint with the Family Policy Compliance Office, which is a part of the U.S. Department of Education, and then they are responsible for doing the investigating and reviewing if any sort of violation has been made. And then consequences if there is violation of FERPA. This, in extreme case, would be cut off from federal funding, but in FERPA's 30-year existence, that's never happened. More than likely, the Family Policy Compliance Office, a part of the U.S. Department of Education, would reach out to the school and implement policies and procedures to ensure that any sort of violation that has occurred does not occur again in the future. Other lawful requirements that fall under FERPA. So the first one is that federal, state, and local law requires that all children are provided with equal access to public education at the elementary and secondary levels. So that would be anything from pre-K through 12th grade. Another lawful requirement is that school districts must maintain confidentiality of personal identifiable information in educational records. Again, this is not stated as to how that has to be done. It just has to be done in a way that a district or a school sees fit. And finally, FERPA permits school districts to disclose student information without consent under a couple of circumstances. The first one would be with a judicial or lawful order. The next one would be if it was in connection with a health or safety emergency of a child. And finally, if it's in connection with a student that's a part of a violent crime or a sex offense, then a school is lawfully permitted to disclose any sort of student information. Continuing on with other lawful requirements, schools are responsible for what vendors do with their data. So if a vendor intentionally or accidentally were to misuse any student information, the school would be at fault because the school decided that it was okay to share that information with a third-party vendor. And then FERPA affords schools and districts flexibility when responding to circumstances. If there is a threat to health or safety, there is a little bit of flexibility for the schools there. And understanding that the provisions of FERPA relative to certain circumstances, as long as schools know the law, follow the law to the best of their ability, and do what is best for the health and safety of all, typically those things would be acceptable by the U.S. Department of Education. Now we're going to move into what personally identifiable information is. There's a long list of things that could be included in this, but mainly it is anything that could be directly related to a student. So if somebody were to get a hold of this information and they could deduct, oh, I know that it's this student, that would be considered personally identifiable information. Some of these things include a student's name and address, as well as the name and address of the parents and any other family members, social security number or a student ID number, a list of any personal characteristics that would make them easily traceable. So something that is very specific to a specific child could be personally identifiable information. And finally, indirect identifiers such as a student's date or their place of birth and a mother's maiden name that could be connected to that student could be considered personally identifiable information. And then continuing on with personally identifiable information, in January 2009, biometric record was added as a personal identifier. So some of these things include fingerprints, retina and iris patterns, voice prints, DNA sequences, facial characteristics, and handwriting. All of those things could now be considered personally identifiable information. So now we're going to be moving into education record. What is education record? What would be included in that? Some of these things can include test scores, class standing, any sort of health information, description of physical appearance, family economic circumstances, criminal history, ethnic background, any political and religious affiliations, psychological test results, birth date, and a social security number. So all of those things could be included in educational record, and if it is included in an education record, it would then in turn be protected by FERPA. So some people are calling for some changes to FERPA, and there's many reasons why. It was established in 1974. And since then, we have moved into a much more digital age, and cyber threats, ransomware, and data theft, all of those things are very prevalent and could call for changes that need to be made to FERPA. A report was claiming that FERPA had become out of touch with modern classrooms and the digital age that we're currently facing. Other changes that FERPA is being scrutinized for right now is not sharing any information over email because it is not the most secure method of communication. And the internet is used in nearly all schools across the U.S., which opens a door immediately for student information to be tracked down stolen and then shared by internet hackers. So our district does have a policy regarding FERPA. It is policy number 5501, and it states that our school district construes all student records except for any of that directory information which parents have not objected to. So if they haven't objected, it can be disclosed. All of that information is supposed to be confidential, and there are procedures, safeguards, all of those things in place to guarantee that student records are not going to be shared outside of our school district. And all of these procedures and safeguards in place by our district are consistent with the FERPA, and then rules and regulations by the Department of Education are also followed by our district. So who can you share information with? This seems like a lot of, I have to keep everything a secret. There are certain people that information can be shared with. Some of those people might include, and this is not a limited list, and all of these people are considered school officials. So this could be a teacher, a school principal or president, a chancellor, a board member, a trustee, a registrar, counselor, admissions officer, attorney, accountant, human resource professional, information system specialist, support or clerical personnel, and contractors, consultants, volunteers, or any other third parties who our district might outsource certain jobs and functions to could also be considered school officials. And they have to have legitimate reasoning for being concerned in someone's educational record. So now that we know all of this, we need to think about, as classroom teachers, what can we do in our own classrooms to help guarantee that we are following FERPA law. So one thing we can do is not use websites that ask for students to enter any sort of personal information unless this website has been approved by a technology supervisor or a school's base technology officer. We need to find out as teachers what companies and vendors our school is comfortable working with, because some of these vendors are trustworthy and then some of them might not be trustworthy. We need to continue to evaluate the technology students are using, making sure it's secure. We need to store our students' data using the school's management system, so don't put their information on your own personal devices. Don't be emailing information. If it is not a verified parent email address, do not accidentally send student information to the wrong people. We also want to make sure that any physical graded materials, grade books, anything like that is stored in a secure and safe place. Wherever that is, you can decide on your own. And finally, do not discuss any student information unless the person has legitimate educational goal for that student. So other ways to remain FERPA compliant: raise FERPA awareness. Make sure you know what FERPA is, what does the law state is acceptable and unacceptable. Confirm that it applies to your educational institution. So if your educational institution does receive federal funding in any way, shape, or form, you must follow any sort of law that would fall under the FERPA Act. Knowing the rights, protections, and exceptions of FERPA. We've talked about some of those exceptions. Choosing compliant vendors that are trustworthy. Make sure all school employees are trained, not just teachers, but support staff, clerical staff, anybody that works with students or student information. Implement policies for any complaints or violations. Encrypt any files and emails that you can encrypt to make sure that they are kept safe. And finally, implement any other prevention tools that might be available to you. If you feel like you're not sure if it's safe, it's probably not safe, and take another step to make sure that information is safe and secure. These are the references that I used to create this presentation. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that this was helpful for you to become more familiar with FERPA.